I like his theory because, you know, you've heard classic theories about linguistic versus non-linguistic hemisphere. So the left hemisphere usually is regarded as the linguistic hemisphere because in right-handed males in particular, language tends to be, you know, pretty located in the left hemisphere. Now, what I would say instead of that is that there are linguistic and non-linguistic systems in the brain. And most of the time they segregate out so that the linguistic system is in the left hemisphere and the non-linguistic system is in the right hemisphere, but it doesn't have to happen that way. It can be reversed with people who are left-handed. It's more distributed in women, and if you lose your whole right hemisphere when you're like 18 months old, so you don't even have a right hemisphere, your left hemisphere will specialize so that it has a linguistic system and a non-linguistic system. Partly the way to think about that is that, you know, the top part of your brain, the cortical cap, you can kind of think about that as plurivalent territory. Lots of things could happen to it. And what happens is that as you develop, the underlying systems, the more biologically archaic systems, colonize the cortex. They fight, basically. So, you know, your ears and your eyes fight over which part of the back of the brain they're going to have access to. And usually the eyes win at the back part of the brain and the ears win more here. But, you know, if you don't have any eyes, the ears are going to colonize the visual systems. And that's partly why if you can't see, you can hear better. So, and even if you lose your hand, like if you lose your thumb when you're an adult, what will happen is the part of the motor cortex that represents your fingers will grow. It'll grow into that area so that these you have more brain now devoted towards these fingers. And if you're born without hands and use your feet, then the feet will start to develop a map that looks like the map of the hand. And there's some flexibility in that, even in adulthood. So there are these underlying systems that grow up, and you know they expand their capacity for differentiation and synthesis by occupying the cortex. And that can happen in a variety of ways, even though it tends to happen in a standard way during normal development. So you could say, it's better for your eyes to invade the visual cortex because it's sort of set up for that. But if they can't invade the visual cortex and it invades the auditory cortex, that works like 90% as well. It's something like that. So the top cortical cap is somewhat specialized, but it's not specialized to the degree that it's lost its plasticity for the first stages of development. It's why child neuropsychology tends to be such a mess, is because the child's brain is so plastic that you can't really say with any certainty what any given part of it happens to be doing, except down in the, you know, in the ancient areas where some stability has been attained. So here's a way of conceptualizing the difference between the left and the right hemisphere. Although, again, I wouldn't think about it that way. Now, the classic distinction is linguistic, non-linguistic. Now Goldberg puts that on his head. He says, no, linguistic, non-linguistic is an emergent property of a more fundamental division. The more fundamental division is between novelty and routine and anomaly. And that maps onto the sorts of discussions that we've been having. What do you have to deal with in the world? Things that work the way you think they will and that you want them to. And then things that don't. So you have a system that works with the things that work the way you want them to, and you have another system that deals with the things that don't. And roughly speaking, in the standard human brain, the right hemisphere seems to be wired for novelty detection, emotional response, and provisional processing. Whereas the left hemisphere seems to be specialized for routinized activities. And that would include representation in language. Now what happens, for example, if you practice a novel task, is that when you first do it, it's very computationally demanding. And so you set out a lot of energy, and a lot of your brain is at work, especially in the right hemisphere. And as you practice it, the right hemisphere stops working, and the left hemisphere works more and more. And then a big part of the left hemisphere works, and then as you keep practicing it, that moves back until there's a little tiny part of your brain that's really active when you're doing it, and you're good at it. And so partly what happens is, imagine it this way, is your brain, when you're first trying to do something complex, maybe you're trying a new piano piece, or maybe you're doing some improvisation. It's like you're trying out all sorts of things, right? A lot of it's error and error correction. It's a bloody mess. It's exhausting. You're doing all this, and you're getting rid of that thing that doesn't work and that thing, and you re-practice this part that's awkward. And as you do that, there are fewer and fewer errors, less variability, and more routinization. And as you're doing that, you're building a little machine at the back of your head that does this perfectly, but that really can't do anything else. Now, that's really an interesting thing to think about, because what it implies is whatever you practice, you build into your implicit processing systems. So be careful what you practice, because once you get one of those little machines back there and it really knows what to do, it's there. Now, you could build another little machine that stops it from doing what it's doing, but it's pretty damn hard to get rid of that machine once you've built it. And so if you build a cocaine consuming and desiring machine in your head, that machine might end up being more powerful than you are, in which case you're basically ruined. And that's really what happens to people who are addicted, because they build expertise in cocaine seeking and preparation and ingestion. And it's really a powerful system because it gets hit by dopamine every time it's successful. So it grows into this like monstrous subpersonality. And all that you need to activate that subpersonality, even if it's been dormant for a long period of time, and you know you're out of the addiction, is the sight of something associated with cocaine. It's like, whoop, up it comes, and you're under the, that's the monkey on your back, so to speak. And so what happens when you're trying to get people unaddicted is that you can take them to a treatment center and let them go through all the minor league horrors of withdrawal, which are nowhere near as bad as people generally claim. So like heroin withdrawal is like a very bad flu for about 4 days. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's not like alcohol withdrawal, which just like kills you often. So you let the person get through all that, they're no longer dependent on the chemical, and they're fine, as long as they're in the treatment center. But as soon as you put them back in their environment and they see like their friend Joe, who's like, you know, their drinking and cocaine partner, it's like poof, up comes the monster and they're gone. And it's very, very difficult to treat addictions, and that's because an addiction is not a psychological thing. It's like you've built a real monster in your head, and you're going to have to like bore it to death over years before it goes away. And then if you're stressed, well, that's going to make it even more difficult for you to inhibit it, and well, it's a bloody mess. It's a mess. Or if you get money, which is like the worst thing that can happen to you if you're an addict, you know, it's like, I've had addicts as clients, and the worst thing that ever happens to them is payday. It's like, they're gone on payday for like 3 days, they're gone. And then they come back and they're all beat to death because they, you know, they've screwed up horribly and they're broke, and so then they're safe till the next time they get some money. So these are the sorts of associations that go along with the novelty versus routinization model of the brain. So it is right versus left roughly, but it's better to think of it the other way, novelty versus routinization.